Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of information, sift through it, and extract the most compelling nuggets, offering you a shortcut to being truly well-informed. Today, we're diving into a genuinely compelling topic, a comprehensive blueprint for rebuilding justice and governance in post-war Ukraine.
Indeed. And what's interesting here is how this isn't just about, technical fixes like rebuilding roads or buildings.
Right.
This deep dive focuses on constructing what the sources call a moral architecture for an entire nation. It's a framework deeply rooted in, specific foundational principles, including those drawn from the Reformed tradition and scripture, aiming to reestablish the habits of trust that war inevitably frays.
So our mission today is to pull out the essential insights from these detailed sources, giving you a clear sense of what such a monumental rebuilding effort might entail. We'll look at its ethical underpinnings and its practical implementation. So let's unpack this. Before we get into the practical steps, let's look at the bedrock of this entire framework. Our sources start by laying out this moral architecture. What does that actually mean when you're talking about rebuilding a nation?
Well, this moral architecture is really a guiding framework, and it combines two core biblical ideas.
Okay.
First, it acknowledges the dignity of every single citizen, viewing them as bearing the image of God, from Genesis.
Right, inherent worth.
Exactly. So at the heart of governance, there's this fundamental respect for each individual. But second, it couples that with a sober realism about human depravity, as Paul talks about in Romans.
So not cynical, but realistic.
Realistic, yeah. Acknowledging that even people with good intentions are, fallible, susceptible to error, to temptation. So this dual perspective shapes how government itself is viewed. It recognizes both the high calling of public service and the constant need for checks on that human fallibility.
How does this perspective then shape the role of those in public office? What does it mean for them?
It leads to this view of the civil magistrate as God's servant. That's language from Romans 13 and also 1 Peter. And it's formalized in things like the Westminster Confession of Faith.
Okay.
So it means rulers are tasked with restraining evil and commending good. But critically, they are themselves bound by law. Deuteronomy 17 is pretty clear on this. They're not above the law.
So no blank checks.
Absolutely not. This approach rejects any notion of rulers grasping excessive authority or trying to establish some kind of clerical rule. Their authority is meant to serve, not dominate.
And how does it understand the distinction between the church and the state? That's often a tricky area.
It is. The framework states that church and state are distinct spheres with different missions. That's again from the Westminster Confession. But it adds that they can, under common grace, serve each other's good.
Common grace. What does that mean here?
It means God's general provision, sort of the way he maintains order and allows for good things in society broadly, not just within the church. So it's not aiming for a theocracy.
Definitely not.
No. Instead, it looks for God's general provision to enable societal good and order, with each sphere, church and state, operating within its defined boundaries.
So what practical ideas for good governance flow directly from these foundational convictions? What does it look like on the ground?
Several key institutional ideas emerge. First, justice must be impartial and resistant to bribery. That's straight out of Deuteronomy 16. Treat everyone equally, fight corruption in the courts.
Seems fundamental.
It is. Second, legal processes require due process that privileges truthful testimony and punishes false witnesses. Again, Deuteronomy 19. Fair proceedings based on truth with real consequences for lying. And third, authority should be distributed to the lowest competent level. This is a principle you see in Exodus 18, with Jethro advising Moses. Decentralize power to protect liberty and foster local responsibility.
Now, a core conviction running through the sources is that legitimacy must precede capacity. What does this mean for how the entire rebuilding process should actually begin?
It means establishing trust and a clear moral foundation for governance is paramount. Right. It comes before focusing on technical competence or just the ability to, get things done.
So trust first, efficiency second.
In a way, yes. Think about it. If people see the government as fundamentally unjust or corrupt, it doesn't matter how efficient it is at, say, collecting taxes. It won't have genuine support.
Right.
So by first re-anchoring expectations, making power visibly operate within moral and legal boundaries, the nation starts to trust that justice isn't for sale. That paves the way for deeper, more technical reforms to actually stick. That legitimacy is the foundation.
Okay, let's turn to the immediate aftermath of the war, what the sources describe as a 90-day sprint. This initial phase is presented as the moral scaffolding for everything that follows. What specific instruments are proposed to re-anchor these first principles right away?
There are three primary instruments proposed for this initial sprint. The first is a charter of public justice.
A charter? What's that involve?
It's conceived as a short binding framework, not a whole new constitution, but a clear statement. It would be enacted by Ukraine's parliament, the Verkhovna Rada, acknowledged by the Constitutional Court, and put into action by the Ministry of Justice.
Finds its purpose.
Its purpose is to clearly restate fundamental norms that often get, well, murky during a crisis. Things like the impartiality of judges, equality before the law, the clear prohibition of bribery and partiality, strong due process protections, and liberty of conscience again, drawing on ideas like those in the Westminster Confession.
Okay, making the basics explicit again.
Exactly. And it also makes open justice the default. That means public hearings, timely publication of reasoned decisions, accessible public registers, with only very narrow exceptions for genuine security needs.
How do they ensure it has buy-in?
Its adoption aims for a broad parliamentary majority to show national unity, and the sources even suggest a public reading in the legislature, kind of echoing that biblical tradition of leaders placing themselves under the law, like in Deuteronomy 17. It's about modeling humility and restoring confidence that public power will operate within clear moral and legal boundaries.
And the second instrument in this 90-day period?
The second is an Oath and Ethics Act for all office holders and civil servants. This reflects that scriptural expectation, that rulers should be truthful and hate a bribe. Think Exodus 18, Exodus 23, Psalm 15.
So standardized oath.
Yes, a single constitutional oath taken in open session. And it would explicitly include a promise to uphold that charter of public justice we just talked about.
And this connects to that reformed idea of covenantal accountability.
Precisely. The sources highlight that. An oath isn't just ceremony. It's viewed as a solemn appeal to God as a witness, binding the conscience to truth-telling and faithful service. That's a strong theme in Westminster Confession 22.
What else does the Ethics Act include?
It requires annual declarations of assets and interests from officials and their dependent entities. Crucially, it criminalizes false declarations and undisclosed conflicts.
How do they avoid cynicism about those declarations? We've seen that elsewhere.
By publishing them in a searchable format with only very specific privacy protections for security concerns, it also prohibits gifts above a modest, clearly defined amount, requires recusal when an official's personal interests are involved, and establishes meaningful penalties for perjury, influence-peddling, and, well, trading public office. It's about building personal accountability.
Okay, charter, oath. What about the third instrument, the continuity code?
The Continuity Code essentially republishes core criminal and civil procedures, sort of reestablishing the baseline. But its crucial element is identifying any temporary derogations, that is, exceptions to normal law, that were adopted during wartime.
Ah, the emergency measures.
Right. Each of these wartime exceptions must have an explicit near-term expiry date and require mandatory legislative review. This directly guards against what the sources call the normalization of emergency powers that Scripture warns will burden the people, referencing that passage in 1 Samuel 8 about the dangers of kingship.
So sunsets are built in.
Built in, yes. And the code also triggers accelerated judicial review for any renewed derogations, demanding detailed public justifications. It guarantees defendants access to counsel and evidence, with special advocate safeguards in strictly defined cases. By clearly printing the law and setting time limits on exceptions, the state sends a clear signal. Rulers are not above the rules, but under them. That's fundamental to ordered liberty, again echoing Deuteronomy 17. It helps prevent the quiet creep of emergency measures becoming permanent.
How is this initial burst of reform made visible to the public? Because that seems vital for rebuilding trust, doesn't it?
Visibility is considered absolutely vital. Within 30 days of the charter's adoption, ministries have to post the charter, the oath, and model ethics guidelines on a single public portal. Easy access.
Okay.
Within 60 days, every covered official must file that initial asset declaration. And within 90 days, courts should begin publishing judgments to a searchable database with minimal delay.
And communication.
It's intended to be multi-channel. Televised explanations by justice officials, parliamentary leaders, plain language summaries, regional town halls, may be hosted with partners like bar associations or universities.
What about the role of churches here?
Churches, importantly, without becoming entangled or having their doctrine controlled by the state, are encouraged to contribute. How? By promoting truth-telling, restitution, neighbor love, and civic life. Reminding congregations that bribery and false witness are sins that corrode the common good. You see that in Proverbs 17, Deuteronomy 19.
And the state's responsibility in that relationship.
The state, for its part, must safeguard liberty of conscience and ensure the equal application of law to all communities. That's consistent with Leviticus 24 and the Westminster Confession. The whole point is transparency and clear commitment to rebuild public confidence.
Now, beyond these foundational instruments, the sources also zero in on immediate emergency power guardrails. You mentioned the dangers associated with emergency powers becoming permanent. How does this plan seek to contain them right from the outset?
Well, as mentioned, Scripture itself warns against rulers seizing extraordinary prerogatives that will burden the people. That 1 Samuel 8 warning is potent. The magistrate, as God's servant in Romans 13, isn't a law unto himself, so the danger is that these crisis powers just stick around.
Right, the temporary becomes permanent.
Exactly. So the plan establishes clear limits in these first 3 months. It defines what truly counts as an emergency, who can declare it, which rights can or cannot be limited, how long measures can last, and crucially, how they're reviewed and made transparent. It's about protecting ordered liberty and restoring trust, while still allowing the state to act decisively when there's genuine peril.
So, what are the specific guardrails proposed?
First, the definition of an emergency has to be strictly limited. Objective, verifiable conditions. Armed attack, imminent threat to territorial integrity, mass casualty disasters, systemic failure of critical infrastructure with immediate risk to life.
So no vague justifications.
No vague public order excuses. Any declaration must precisely specify the area, the threats, the lawful tools, the rights being limited, the plan, the budget ceiling, the end state. And presidential declarations, they're provisional. They automatically lapse in 14 days unless the parliament approves them by a supermajority. Renewals have to be shorter and require fresh factual findings. This upholds the law's supremacy over rulers, like in Deuteronomy 17, but allows speed when needed. Second, there needs to be fast judicial review. The Constitutional Court has to schedule any challenge within 7 days and decide within 14, publishing reasoned opinions.
And who can bring a challenge?
Standing to sue is broad. The Ombudsman, a minority of parliament, professional associations, affected municipalities. They can all challenge these decrees. Courts can sever overbroad parts. Stop abuses require narrower measures.
What about secrecy concerns during emergencies?
Public hearings are the default. Closed sessions for classified evidence are strictly limited, and special advocates get appointed to challenge the government's claims from within that secure environment. Truthful testimony, impartial judgment, those remain the standard, even under pressure. That's Deuteronomy 19, Proverbs 12 again. Third, the plan entrenches non-derogable rights. These are fundamental rights that can never be violated, even in an emergency. Like that. Prohibitions on torture, enforced disappearance, retroactive criminal punishment. Categorical bans on worship or conscience, that's Acts 5, we must obey God rather than men, and the Westminster Confession's emphasis on conscience. Assembly and movement can have time, place, manner rules for safety, but can't be silenced wholesale. Press restrictions, narrowly drawn to imminent operational harms, subject to prompt judicial review. Compelled speech is prohibited.
And detention rules.
They have to remain robust. No secret detention. Access to counsel within 24-48 hours. Charge or release within a fixed period, with evidence access via security-cleared counsel where needed. These strict rules keep the state's sword ministerial, not arbitrary. That's Romans 13, Psalm 82. Fourth, there's discipline for surveillance and procurement. 2 areas really prone to unchecked expansion in crises.
Right, easy places for overreach.
Exactly. For surveillance, warrants are generally required. If immediate interception is necessary due to pressing circumstances, you need ex post judicial approval within 72 hours, strict purpose limitation, retention caps, deletion mandates, and immutable audit logs reviewed by an independent inspectorate.
And procurement. Emergency contracts.
Emergency single-source contracts are only allowed with public posting of the contract details, beneficial ownership info, and price justifications within 30 days. All emergency spending is subject to rolling audits and clawback authority. The sorts of stress, bribes, pervert justice in peacetime and wartime alike, Exodus 23, Proverbs 17. Fifth, cross-branch oversight with opposition leadership. This is interesting. A temporary emergency review committee is created, chaired by a member of the opposition.
Opposition-led. That's significant.
It is. It includes the Ombudsman, the head of the Supreme Audit Institution, civil experts. They meet weekly, get classified briefings, issue public summaries balancing transparency and safety. Importantly, the committee's mandate sunsets with the emergency, preventing permanent crisis committees. Ministries also publish weekly dashboards detailing measures, arrests, spending, rights limited, and the reasons why. As Proverbs 29 says, by justice a king builds up the land. Sunlight fosters legitimacy. Sixth, The plan sets clocks and requires declassification. Every emergency measure must have an expiry date. Renewals must be shorter and face higher evidence thresholds. After 180 days, orders are presumptively declassified with narrow redactions. A post-action rights impact assessment is published, detailing mistakes and remedies. And officials' oaths. They're renewed publicly with each renewal, reinforcing accountability. Finally, there's emphasis on training and communication. Within this initial 0-3-month period, plain language manuals go out to police, prosecutors, local administrators. Tabletop exercises are run. Judges briefed on fast-track review. A public portal aggregates all decrees, rulings, procurement records, oversight reports. And again, churches, without state entanglement, can exhort members to truthfulness and neighbor love, resisting panic and opportunism, while the state safeguards liberty and equal justice. These guardrails are seen as strengthening the state's authority by making it credible, moral, and effective because it operates under law.
Okay, so after that intense 90-day sprint for stability and guardrails, the next phase, from 3 to 24 months, focuses on transitional justice and accountability. The goal is described as binding wounds without breaking the bones of justice. What does this phase prioritize, and how does it try to uphold those principles like truthful testimony and protecting the vulnerable?
Right. This next phase is about addressing the really grave wrongs that happen, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and also the grand corruption often linked to conflict while simultaneously restoring public confidence in the rule of law. It's still guided by those scriptural requirements. Truthful testimony, proportionate penalties, protection for the weak. Think Deuteronomy 19, Psalm 82, Micah 6.
And the role of the magistrate.
Still God's servant, as in Romans 13, punishing evil and commending good, but always under law, without partiality or bribery, as Deuteronomy 16 insists. The goal here isn't vengeance. It's about establishing public righteousness, naming evil, restraining it, honoring victims, and cleansing the system of entrenched injustice.
Tell us more about the specialized chambers for war crimes and corruption. What's the thinking behind setting them up that way?
The core idea is specialized, independent war crime and grand corruption chambers within the national judiciary. So, supported by limited-term international advisors for expertise, perhaps, but preserving national ownership, which is key for legitimacy.
And the people involved.
They require judges and prosecutors who are meticulously vetted. They have to meet that Exodus 18 standard. Able, trustworthy, and hating bribes. Their security and independence are crucial insulated salaries, witness protection resources, tamper-proofed case assignment to prevent manipulation.
How do they gather evidence for these complex cases?
A distinct investigative service is proposed, with forensic, financial, digital capabilities. They'd maintain rigorous chain of custody for evidence, making sure public verdicts rest on demonstrable truth, as Proverbs 12 puts it. It's about thorough, credible justice.
How does the plan ensure that victims are truly central to this process, not just, evidence providers?
Victims are meant to be centered, really cared for. This reflects that call in James 1 to care for widows and orphans. So a victim services authority would provide practical support, legal aid, trauma counseling, relocation help if needed, secure ways to testify.
And their experiences.
A national registry would collect victim impact statements. These would inform sentencing, but also guide distributions from a restitution fund.
A restitution fund? Where does that money come from?
It would be capitalized by recovered aggressor assets and corruption proceeds. The idea is to return ill-gotten gains to those most grievously harmed, and public ceremonies of acknowledgement led by civil authorities would honor suffering without politicizing worship, keeping those church-state distinctions clear.
Beyond individual war crimes, how does the plan aim to tackle the systemic corruption that might have flourished during the crisis?
Yeah, accountability has to reach that systemic level. The sources point to Scripture's condemnation of dishonest scales in Proverbs 11 that applies here. The specialized chambers would prioritize cases with the biggest public impact. Think cartels, bid rigging and reconstruction, pay-to-play schemes.
And it's not just criminal charges.
No, criminal charges are paired with asset recovery. This includes using unexplained wealth orders. These are tools compliant with due process that allow seizure if assets grossly exceed lawful income and can't be reasonably explained.
What about encouraging people to come forward?
Robust whistleblower protection and rewards for useful information are crucial, with serious penalties for retaliation. Sentences would be proportionate prison for serious offenses, yes, but also disqualification from office and mandatory restitution.
No.
The goal is to reteach the nation that bribery is a cancer, not just a way to get things done.
Is there any room for amnesty in such a process, or is it all prosecution?
There is, but it's very specific. The framework allows for a tightly drawn conditional amnesty only for lesser offenses that didn't involve violence, torture, or egregious rights violations.
Conditional how?
It references numbers 5, which commends confession and restitution. So amnesty would require offenders to voluntarily confess within a set time frame, fully disclose networks and assets, and complete restitution for harm caused. Grave crimes are explicitly excluded. Repeat offenders are ineligible.
So it's not a blanket pardon.
Not at all. The sources call it mercy as a minister of justice, not undermining justice, and it rejects collective guilt or collective absolution. Each case depends on individual actions and evidence.
How will evidentiary rules and what the sources call institutional purification contribute to truth and accountability in this phase?
Evidentiary rules are designed to reward truth. That Deuteronomic 2 or 3 witness principle gets translated into a modern requirement for corroboration. No conviction for serious crimes without supporting evidence, forensics, digital records, etc.
And false testimony.
It faces proportionate sanctions, like in Deuteronomy 19. Defense access to evidence is real, with security-cleared counsel for classified material, and all rulings are written and published quickly online.
What about institutional purification? Sounds intense.
It means individualized, evidence-based lustration or debarment, not sweeping purges. A civil service integrity board would hold expedited hearings to remove or bar officials credibly implicated in grave abuses or corruption. But there are appeal rights, and bans are time-limited. Security services undergo similar vetting. The goal is retaining good people and offering reintegration paths where possible, reducing backlash, kind of like Romans 12 suggests about overcoming evil with good.
Finally, how will progress be measured, and how will errors be addressed during this transitional justice phase?
Measurement and repentance are seen as crucial for trust. Quarterly reports would publish key data: indictments, convictions, acquittals, case lengths, asset recoveries, victim payouts.
Transparency.
And when mistakes happen?
Officials are expected to acknowledge and correct them publicly. Public contrition is framed as moral leadership, citing Proverbs 28 on confessing transgressions. Churches, again without state entanglement, can call individuals to heart repentance and reconciliation, but they don't short-circuit civil accountability. The overall approach aims to teach a nation to love what is good and to hate what is evil, like in Romans 12, creating space for peace under law.
Okay, let's move to rebuilding the judiciary itself. This is a longer process planned for a 6 to 36-month horizon. The sources say this must marry character with competence, so courts act as the nation's public conscience under law. How does the plan aim to achieve this balance, starting with how judges are selected?
Well, the whole effort is guided by that scriptural charge to judge without partiality and to hate a bribe, Deuteronomy 16, Exodus 18 again, and also to apply truth and proportionality, like in Deuteronomy 19.
And the Reformed tradition adds,
It adds that magistrates are ministers of God with limited authority, Romans 13, Westminster Confession 23, and that oaths solemnly bind the conscience, from Westminster 22. So the goal is a bench that shows integrity, is protected from capture, and uses procedures that deliver justice visibly, swiftly, and justly.
So how exactly are judges selected to meet these high standards of both legal skill and personal integrity? That sounds like a tall order.
It is. The plan calls for selection to be merit-based and moral, using a 2-stage process. First, a blind standardized exam tests legal reasoning. Blind, meaning the reviewers don't know who the candidate is, to ensure objectivity.
Okay, screening for competence first.
Right. Second, for those who pass that stage, there's a public character hearing. This assesses integrity, conflicts of interest, financial probity, community reputation. It gathers input from bar associations, civil society.
And oaths play a role here, too.
Yes, candidates would swear an open oath to uphold the Constitution and the Charter of Public Justice, with criminal penalties for false declarations. Background screening includes thorough asset checks for spouses and dependent entities, too, digging deep for potential conflicts.
What about diversity on the bench?
The focus here is on jurisdictional breadth, ensuring representation from, say, devastated regions or smaller towns, rather than focusing on partisan balance. And there's a judicial school proposed for intensive courses in ethics, evidence, case management, plus mentored clerkships. Judges who don't meet standards after support face removal through due process, while excellence gets rewarded through promotion paths insulated from political patronage.
What about the structure of the courts themselves and making sure they're accessible to everyone?
The structure is designed to be simple, accessible, and resistant to backlogs. A tiered system. Local trial, courts the gates, as Deuteronomy 16 calls them, close to daily life, then regional courts of appeal, and a Supreme Court for doctrine.
Any specialization?
Yes. specialized benches for complex or high corruption risk cases, anti-corruption, commercial, war-related property claims. This prevents forum shopping through random assignment, and in more affected areas, mobile circuit courts and secure video links to reach displaced people without sacrificing fair process or open courts. Plus, all courts track time standards for cases, holding leadership accountable for delays.
Judicial independence is obviously key. How does the plan ensure this in practical terms, beyond just saying it's important?
Independence is made very practical. Judges get a secure salary, indexed to inflation, protected from annual political fights, personal security and relocation options if they're threatened. Courthouses and digital systems are hardened against tampering.
And case assignment.
Tamper-proof, using auditable randomization. Any deviation needs a written, reviewable order. Recusal rules are clear and enforceable, with sanctions for undisclosed conflicts. Ex parte contacts those back-channel communications strictly prohibited. Gift bans are clear and low threshold, reflecting that warning from Exodus and Proverbs that a bribe blinds the clear-sighted.
Who polices the judges themselves?
An independent judicial inspectorate, separate from the executive and judicial leadership, investigates misconduct. It recommends discipline to a High Council of Justice, which has to publish reasoned decisions and data on complaints. It's about internal integrity with external transparency.
And the procedures within the courtroom? How are they designed to reward truth and reduce manipulation?
An evidence code gets codified. It requires corroboration for serious crimes, that modern version of the 2 or 3 witness principle. It sets chain of custody standards. It punishes perjury proportionally, like in Deuteronomy 19.
What about the defense?
Defense access to evidence is guaranteed, with security-cleared counsel for classified material. Pretrial detention is exceptional, requires periodic review and written reasons. Sentencing is guided by proportionality and restitution to victims, as in Exodus 22, with appellate review for consistency.
Transparency keeps coming up. How is it a keystone for the judiciary, specifically in this plan?
It's built in everywhere. A national e-justice platform for e-filing, calendars, and a searchable database of judgments posted within 7 days with minimal redactions. Reasoned opinions required for all significant rulings. Quarterly court performance dashboards at every level, showing clearance rates, case duration, reversal rates. This open data allows public oversight, external audits, academic evaluations. Proverbs 12 again, whoever speaks the truth gives honest evidence. Transparency lets the public verify that.
What strategies are in place to address the inevitable backlogs that build up, especially after conflict?
It's a mix of triage and alternative routes. Expedited tracks for small claims, uncontested matters, expanding mediation and court-annexed arbitration for commercial disputes, authorizing evening and weekend sittings if needed, maybe recalling retired judges for fixed terms to clear old cases, pairing them with younger judges. The idea is to concentrate the full, complex procedures where liberty or major interests are truly at stake.
Finally, how does the plan aim to shape the culture within the judiciary? It's not just about rules, right?
Right. Culture is seen as critical. Annual ethics renewal ceremonies for judges and prosecutors, public, serious, covenantal, reminding them they serve under God and law for the neighbor's good, like Romans 13 and Psalm 15 suggest. Court leaders hold town halls to explain reforms, get feedback, and churches, without state entanglement, can promote truthfulness, patience, reconciliation in society, while the state guards liberty and equal treatment. When character, craft, and clarity combine, the judiciary becomes credible, showing power stands under law and justice is not for sale.
All right, let's tackle corruption directly. It's a huge challenge. The sources outline an anti-corruption architecture spanning 36 months, aiming to make bribery costly. How does this framework try to marry that moral clarity with mechanical certainty?
It builds right on that scriptural condemnation, dishonest scales, and bribery as assaults on the very order of public righteousness. Think Leviticus 19, Proverbs 11, Exodus 23, Deuteronomy 16, Proverbs 17. That provides the moral clarity. Corruption is wrong. It's destructive.
And the mechanical certainty?
That comes from translating the moral clarity into practical measures. Creating bright lines, opening the books, having independent investigators, swift courts, and restitution that makes wrongdoing genuinely costly. Reflecting Micah 6.8, do justly, and maybe Zacchaeus in Luke 19, paying back what was taken. The whole system is designed to make corruption hard to commit, easy to detect, and very expensive if you get caught.
What are the core components of the Comprehensive Anti-Corruption Architecture Act that gets this rolling?
This act, planned for the first 6 months, is foundational. It precisely defines and penalizes bribery, influence peddling, bid rigging, self-dealing, misuse of administrative resources. It criminalizes both giving and receiving bribes and explicitly forbids facilitation payments, those small grease payments.
What about transparency of officials' wealth?
It mandates public asset and interest declarations for senior officials, spouses, dependent entities, published in machine-readable format, randomly verified to combat cynicism. Crucially, it creates a beneficial ownership registry with identity verification and sanctions for false filings, aiming to show who really owns companies involved with the state.
And public contracts.
A clean contracting portal is key. Every detail of public procurement tenders, bids, evaluations, contracts, change orders, milestones, payments posted publicly with audit logs. Emergency single-source deals are strictly limited, requiring publication within 30 days and audits afterward. Plus, a low gift cap, clear conflict of interest recusal rules, and cooling-off periods to stop that revolving door between public service and lobbying that can breed corruption, as Isaiah 33 might hint at.
What new institutions are created to actually enforce this architecture? An act is one thing, enforcement is another.
Right. For months 6 to 18, several mutually reinforcing institutions get stood up. An independent inspector general with subpoena power, protected budget. A financial intelligence unit to track suspicious transactions, a national forensic accounting lab, specialized anti-corruption prosecutors, and an anti-corruption court with tamper-proof case assignment, insulated salaries.
And whistleblowers.
A dedicated whistleblower authority. It enables confidential reporting, provides anti-retaliation shields, even interim relief, and pays rewards when tips lead to asset recoveries. Think Proverbs 29, Psalm 15 again. Plus, those unexplained wealth orders we mentioned, due process compliant tools shifting the burden when assets wildly exceed known income. Convictions mean mandatory restitution, debarment, disgorgement, with proceeds going to victims and public interest funds. Things like integrity packs on big projects and project bank accounts ensure funds only flow against verified work, cutting down on skimming.
How does the plan address money in politics, which is often intertwined with corruption?
Political finance gets fortified. Foreign and anonymous donations, banned. Real-time, low-threshold campaign finance disclosure in open data formats so you see who's giving, quickly. An ad archive showing sponsors, targeting, and criminalizing the misuse of state resources for campaigns. Again, Proverbs 20 on honest measures is relevant.
What about preventing corruption before it happens and making the whole system publicly visible?
From months 18 to 36, the focus shifts to normalizing prevention and maximizing transparency, institutionalizing risk-based audits, triggering lifestyle audits when red flags appear, publishing quarterly red flag dashboards showing anomalies, investigations, indictments, recoveries.
What about corruption at the local level?
Seeding municipal integrity units to tackle petty corruption, recognizing it feeds the bigger problems. Professionalizing vendors with a public performance register. Using leniency policies to encourage disclosure, not silence. Reinforcing personal integrity through annual oath renewals, asset updates, mandatory ethics training. A culture of written reasons for decisions, Proverbs 12 again.
And pulling all this information together.
A single integrity portal aggregates everything contracts: beneficial ownership, political finance, audits, court outcomes, complaint channels, searchable, downloadable, independently auditable. Ministries publish corrective action plans for bad audits. Civil society gets standing to sue for non-disclosure. The aim is a system where bribes are costly, secrecy is rare, honesty is rewarded, and rulers stand under law, leading to justice that builds up the land, like Proverbs 29 says, and seeing public office as stewardship before God, like in Luke 16.
Okay, elections are obviously fundamental to public trust. How does this blueprint aim to rebuild electoral integrity and party responsibility over the 6 to 48-month horizon?
Well, the sources frame electoral integrity as the civil equivalent of honest weights and measures. Proverbs 11:20, Leviticus 19. It's a moral imperative. The goal is ensuring ballots are counted fairly, public authority is used for service, and citizens can vote and speak without coercion, upholding liberty of conscience from the Westminster Confession in Acts 5. It's achieved through transparency, verifiability, and responsibility.
What's the plan for the Central Election Commission, the body overseeing elections?
The Independent Central Election Commission, CEC, gets fortified. Fixed, staggered terms for members to promote stability, a multi-partisan appointment process to ensure broad representation, reduce capture, a protected budget to shield it from financial pressure, and this structure is mirrored down at the regional level for consistency.
What legal bright lines are set for campaigns and political finance in the election context?
The laws criminalize misusing administrative resources for campaigns, ban vote buying, prohibit foreign and anonymous donations, contributions are capped, and real-time machine-readable disclosure of donors above a low threshold is required, shining a light on campaign funding.
How is the integrity of the voting process itself ensured, especially if machines are involved?
Integrity is both mechanical and moral here. Voter-verified paper ballots are mandated for every vote, even if machines assist. That paper trail is key for audits. Pre-election logic and accuracy tests are open to observers. Tabulation software source code is published or held in escrow for audit.
What about the physical ballots?
Chain of custody logs, tamper evidence seals, dual control procedures at every transfer point. Counting has to be public at the precinct level, those gates from Deuteronomy 16 again. Results posted locally, photographed, uploaded to a national portal quickly. A read-only API lets independent groups recompute totals, Proverbs 12, truthful evidence.
And how are those results verified statistically afterwards?
Risk-limiting audits are mandated by law, not optional. Within 72 hours of polls closing, statistically sound hand counts verify outcomes in random precincts. If discrepancies exceed thresholds, it expands to full recounts. It's a robust check.
What about voters who can't easily vote in person? Absentee, military, diaspora, displaced people.
These channels need equal rigor. Identity verification tied to national registries, secure drop-off points with chain of custody, strict deadlines, segregated counting for auditability, plus accessibility provisions like ramps, mobile teams, justice for all bearing God's image, Genesis 1, Leviticus 19.
How is information integrity handled? Misinformation is a huge issue in elections.
The approach favors light and competition over censorship. An online ad library archives all political ads, showing sponsors, spending, targeting. State communications are labeled. Opposition parties get guaranteed access to public media during regulated periods, all while preserving robust press freedom with only narrow, court-reviewable security exceptions.
Drawing electoral district gerrymandering is always a concern. How does this plan ensure fairness?
An independent boundaries commission is created to prevent manipulation. It draws districts using transparent criteria, equal population, contiguity, respecting communities of interest, using open data. Draft maps are published for public comment and subject to judicial review to deter manipulation, Leviticus 19, impartiality.
How is swift enforcement of election laws ensured when violations occur?
Specialized election offense prosecutors and fast-track courts with tight timelines for challenges. Weekly enforcement bulletins published during the election cycle detailing complaints, investigations, sanctions so the public sees impartial action.
And the role of political parties themselves in maintaining integrity.
Party responsibility is seen as crucial. They mediate between citizen and state. To prevent capture by money or personality, like in 1 Samuel 8, they must maintain audited accounts, disclose owners of affiliated media foundations, file membership rolls, adopt bylaws guaranteeing member rights, transparent leadership contests, and candidate vetting against conflicts and criminality, Exodus 18, Psalm 15 standards.
Any link between funding and behavior?
Public subsidies are tied to compliance with suspension or clawback for violations. Campaign conduct should be covenantal, not just tactical. Sign codes of fair practice prohibiting incitement or knowing falsehoods about procedures, with public sanctions for breaches, Exodus 23.
Finally, how does civic education fit into this electoral picture?
Civic education helps cultivate informed citizens. Curricula on rule of law, disinformation discernment, ethics of speech, nonpartisan voter info portals, nationwide debates. Churches, while independent and not endorsing parties, are encouraged to teach consciences against bribery, false witness, ethnic hatred, praying for just rulers. 2 Samuel 23, 1 Timothy 2. The through line. Ballots are promises, offices are stewardship, public authority is ministerial.
Okay, the blueprint also calls for localism and fiscal federalism, describing local governance as judging in the gates. What does this mean for citizens' daily experience, and how does this plan empower municipalities and regions while still ensuring national standards are met?
Right, judging the gates, Deuteronomy 16, Exodus 18, again means officials know their neighbors, apply law close to daily life. It values responsive governance. Fiscal federalism provides the money for this without dissolving national unity. So, over 636 months, authority and resources get distributed downward, but crucially anchored to national standards of justice, transparency, solvency.
It's balancing proximity and principle.
Exactly. Scripture commends both. And the Reformed tradition adds sphere sovereignty and limited magistracy under law, Westminster 23. Family, church, market, state. Each serve their ends without swallowing the others.
What specific local competences are actually outlined to make this real?
The central government legislates a clear list. Things like land property registries, basic civil infrastructure, primary education facilities, public health outreach, sanitation, local policing standards, licensing, small claims courts, code enforcement. But these are paired with national floors for rights, data, audit, due process.
How does the financing work to ensure local responsibility and avoid just becoming dependent on the center?
Finance follows function. Predictable own-source revenues are assigned to localities like a reformed property tax with a market-based valuation system, maybe modest user fees limited by equity rules. Plus, formula-driven intergovernmental grants, transparent, rule-bound, are guaranteed. And equalization transfers to poorer areas so birthplace doesn't determine access to justice or basic services. That reflects Proverbs 29, Leviticus 19 on equity.
What measures are in place to prevent local corruption or capture by local elites? That seems like a risk with decentralization.
It is, so the mechanics get hardened. Adopting a standardized chart of accounts and e-budgeting platform for every municipality, requiring quarterly, machine-readable publication of budgets, contracts, vendor ownership, payrolls, arrears, banning off-balance sheet liabilities, imposing hard budget constraints, no bailout rules, paired with a lawful municipal insolvency regime.
And procurement at the local level.
Open by default. E-tendering, public contracts, change orders published within days. Because corrupt scales are an abomination. Proverbs 11, Exodus 23. Making local capture harder and more visible.
How will justice and policing be strengthened at the local level under this plan?
Justice needs to be accessible. Local courts, mediation centers in accessible places, online calendars, prompt decision publication, civilian police oversight boards with subpoena power, diverse members, public reporting. Setting minimum national use of force and custody standards, but letting cities innovate above those floors.
Property issues are critical for rebuilding, especially after conflict. How does localism address land registries and restitution claims for the displaced?
Land is seen as core to dignity and revenue. So, completing a unified digital cadastre is a priority. Maps, title, history, longs. Mobile cadastre clinics help the displaced file claims, submit affidavits, using evidentiary presumptions, long possession, tax receipts, neighbor testimony to substitute for lost deeds, subject to challenge. Specialized local chambers hear restitution and boundary disputes quickly, publishing decisions, favoring documented possession but guarding the poor from predation. Exodus 22, 1 Kings 21.
What opportunities are there for citizen participation at this local level? How do people get involved?
Participation should be routine. Mandated annual participatory budgeting hearings. Citizen petitions required to trigger agenda items. Standing for residents and civil groups to sue over non-disclosure or unlawful procurement. Appointing municipal ombuds with power to investigate maladministration and recommend binding corrections.
What training and capacity building is envisioned for municipal leaders? They'll have significant new responsibilities.
A municipal leadership academy is proposed for mayors, CFOs, clerks, procurement officers. Focus on ethics, Psalm 15, audit trails, project finance, trauma-informed service delivery. Completion might be tied to accessing certain grants. Pairing high and low capacity jurisdictions for mentoring, deploying regional flying squads of experts to help towns with backlogs, encouraging shared services between towns, funding secure modular civic buildings where needed.
And how are performance and outcomes tied to funding at this local level? Is there accountability?
Yes, money is tied to outcomes. Portions of intergovernmental transfers become performance-based grants, rewarding verified improvements, water service, case time, school attendance, procurement compliance, penalties for chronic non-performance, bonuses for transparent innovations.
Finally, how are civil liberties guarded locally, and what's the role of communication?
Civil liberties are guarded. Protection of freedom of worship and conscience. Westminster 20, Acts 5 is key everywhere. Viewpoint neutral, permitting for assemblies, no local censor boards. Communication is practical. Plain language budgets where your money went leaflets, quarterly town halls, encouraging churches without entanglement to mobilize mercy ministries, James 1, Jeremiah 29, while magistrates remain impartial. The goal is for neighbors to see government not as distant, but as a steward in their gates.
All right, let's talk about police and prosecution. The sources describe them as sword-bearing offices that need to be visibly ministerial, meaning power under law for the neighbor's good. How does this blueprint rebuild these critical institutions over 624 months using those four pillars? Moral limits, procedural light, discipline, discretion, and public accountability.
The guiding principle, again, is that they operate under law, Romans 13, Psalm 82, Westminster 23. They aren't arbitrary forces. So first, moral limits. A national use of force standard gets codified. Necessity, proportionality, last resort. Duty to de-escalate, intervene against unlawful force by others, render aid like the Good Samaritan in Luke 10.
Specific prohibitions.
Bans on torture, cruel treatment, chokeholds, body-worn cameras mandated, presumptive activation, sanctions for intentional deactivation. Stop and search needs articulable, reasonable suspicion documented with a receipt for the citizen. Bias forbidden, Leviticus 19, James 2. Arrests need warrants or pressing circumstances. Custodial interrogations recorded end-to-end. Prompt access to counsel. Coerced confessions inadmissible. Setting clear, bright lines.
Second, procedural light. How does that illuminate the process and ensure fairness?
A national e-case system timestamps everything: arrests, filings, disclosures, custody time with immutable audit logs. Prosecutors adopt written disclosure policies requiring early, continuous sharing of exculpatory and impeaching material. Enforceable remedies for breaches, evidence exclusion, even dismissal, reflecting Deuteronomy 19, Proverbs 12 on truth.
What about defense access and detention?
Defense access is real, with security-cleared counsel for classified material. Pretrial detention is exceptional, requiring judicial findings by clear evidence that conditions can't manage risk. Reason orders, periodic review. Please need a factual basis on record. No gag provisions hiding misconduct. Victim statements heard without pressure, Micah 6, and for victims. Secure reporting, trauma-informed interviewing, witness protection, James 1, again.
Third, discipline discretion. How does this manage the significant latitude police and prosecutors often have?
Scripture's realism about sin warns against both impunity and overreach, Romans 3, Deuteronomy 16. So, charging guidelines get issued. Prioritize violence, organized crime, trafficking, high-level corruption. Steer lesser nonviolent offenses, especially from displaced people, toward aversion, restitution, treatments where appropriate, Exodus 22. Publish declination diversion rates to deter politicization.
What about sentencing and specialized units?
Sentencing recommendations are proportional, transparent, seeking restitution, specialized units for homicide, organized crime, anti-corruption, cybercrime, and importantly, conviction integrity.
Conviction integrity units.
Yes, to review plausible wrongful convictions, order DNA testing, agree to relief when truth demands it. Because, as Proverbs 17 says, punishing the wrong person is itself an injustice that shelters the guilty.
And finally, public accountability. What are the key measures here for transparency and trust?
An Independent Civilian Oversight Authority with subpoena power investigates serious uses of force, deaths in custody, patterns of unconstitutional stops, reprisals against whistleblowers, publishes findings, binding remedial plans, internal affairs separated from command chains. Early intervention systems flag officers with clustered complaints or high-force incidents for intervention.
What about officers fired for misconduct?
A national decertification registry so they can't just rehire elsewhere quietly. Union contracts can't shield dishonesty, hide disciplinary files, or mandate short purge periods. Adequate salaries and counseling are needed, but integrity rules remain non-negotiable. Exodus 23, Proverbs 17 on bribes.
How does training support these pillars, and what role does data play in monitoring all this?
Training hits both conscience and craft. Academies, in-service courses on rights, evidence bias, trauma-informed interviewing, de-escalation, lawful oaths, Westminster 22, paired with evidence-based policing strategies. And quarterly justice dashboards get published: clearance rates, time to charge, disclosure, compliance, suppression rulings, detention numbers, use of force incidents, complaints, discipline outcomes disaggregated, machine-readable. Sunlight dignifies the good officers and restrains abuse, Proverbs 29.
Is there a specific plan for the independence of prosecutors within this framework? That's often a concern.
Yes, institutional independence is key. The prosecutor general appointed to a fixed term, removal only for defined cause. Case selection insulated from ad hoc executive direction. An annual prosecution report detailing priorities, outcomes, needs. Locally, community advisory boards review non-confidential policies. Again, churches can serve in chaplaincy, victim care, mentoring, reminding everyone about sins like false witness and bribery, Exodus 20:23, while the state protects liberty and ensures equal treatment, Westminster 20, Leviticus 24.
Okay, let's shift to property rights in markets, crucial for economic rebuilding. How does the plan approach property, restitution, and markets, grounding them in principles of truthful title, proportionate restoration, and open competition?
Property is framed as stewardship before God, not, a tool for plunder. The earth is the Lord's, Psalm 24 says, and commands like, you shall not steal, Exodus 20, are foundational. The aim is for households to work, invest, rebuild without fear, and to prevent powerful interests from converting public ruin into private gain.
What are the concrete steps for establishing clear property titles, especially when documents might be lost or destroyed in conflict?
It starts with title truth, completing that unified digital cadastre linking maps, title history, liens, beneficial ownership, notary acts, court judgments write directly to this register with immutable logs. Mobile cadastre clinics help the displaced file claims submit affidavits.
What if deeds are missing?
Evidentiary presumptions are enacted. Long possession, tax receipts, utility records, neighborhood testimony can substitute for missing deeds, subject to challenge and review. It acknowledges the reality of conflict.
How will property disputes and restitution claims be handled efficiently and fairly?
Special property chambers with vetted judges, Exodus 18 standard, again hear restitution and boundary disputes on expedited timelines. They publish reasoned decisions online. Where two innocent parties have conflicting claims, calibrated remedies are used. Restore possession, if feasible, or provide compensation or vouchers from that restitution fund we talked about, Luke 19, Exodus 22.
What about things like looted items or destroyed homes?
Standardized schedules for restitution and repair grants are created, with fraud-resistant verification. Prioritization for widows, orphans, the poor, James 1, Leviticus 19.
What measures are in place to guard against new predation or land grabs during the reconstruction phase itself?
A clear moratorium on large land acquisitions in damaged zones above a set threshold, unless approved after public notice, independent valuation, competitive tender. Requiring disclosure of ultimate beneficial owners and financing, courts authorized to unwind deals tainted by coercion or self-dealing, Proverbs 17. Eminent domain must be narrow, necessary, compensated at fair market value determined independently, with judicial review and relocation help. Echoing Isaiah's warning against joining house to house, preventing exploitation of need.
How will markets be kept honest and competitive during reconstruction?
The Competition Authority gets renewed capacity to break cartels, stop bid rigging, prevent reconstruction monopolies, open e-procurement, project bank accounts, integrity packs required for major contracts. All tenders, bids, scores, payments published quickly. Proverbs 11:20 on honest measures.
How does the plan ensure that capital reaches small businesses and builders, not just the big players?
Establishing a movable collateral registry so SMEs can borrow against equipment and inventory. Funding credit guarantee schemes tied to performance. Standardizing construction permits with time limits to reduce petty bribery. A streamlined bankruptcy code distinguishing misfortune from fraud, preserving viable businesses, Proverbs 22, Matthew 5.
What specific initiatives are proposed for housing and agricultural lands, which are often particularly sensitive areas?
For housing, pattern book designs, pre-approved codes to speed things up, a roster of vetted contractors, allowing owners to pool parcels into reconstruction associations. For agricultural lands, protecting smallholders from predatory leases with plain language contracts, rent caps, mandatory mediation, encouraging cooperatives for machinery without collectivizing ownership, funding soil restoration tied to benchmarks ensuring the land, God's gift, isn't depleted, reflecting Leviticus 25.
What about asset recovery related to property and legal aid for those needing help?
Asset recovery pipelines are embedded. Gains from war profiteering, grand corruption get disgorged to the restitution fund, with quarterly public ledgers showing inflows and grants, Proverbs 29. Property clinics at universities, bar associations help the displaced, elderly, poor with claims, plain language notices, and decisions required. And throughout, liberty of conscience and equal treatment, Westminster 20, Leviticus 24 must be guarded. No group excluded by creed or ethnicity. Places of worship get the same protections as homes.
And how does this approach aim to foster a broader stewardship culture regarding property and economics?
Through public campaigns and church exhortations, again, without entanglement, teaching against fraud, false witness and claims, boundary theft, and promoting neighbor love, paying debts, honoring contracts, repairing wrongs, Exodus 23, Romans 13. When ordered this way, property becomes a trust from God, secured by law, restored by restitution, multiplied by honest markets.
Okay. Moving beyond specific institutions, the blueprint emphasizes civil liberties and conscience as ongoing guardrails, calling them not wartime luxuries. How does this framework understand civil liberty, and what is the central place of liberty of conscience within it?
Civil liberty is seen as the creature's due under God, not something the state grants. Why? Because people bear his image, Genesis 1 says. The civil magistrate is just a minister of God for temporal good, Romans 13, Westminster 23. So the state must neither command faith nor compel speech. Its job is to secure public peace where truth can be sought and proclaimed.
And liberty of conscience.
That's central. The Reformed doctrine in Westminster 20 teaches God alone is Lord of the conscience. Rulers can punish crimes against neighbors, but not unbelief itself. They must protect worship, assembly, speech, press, association equally, without favoritism. Leviticus 24, Deuteronomy 16.
What are some of the core freedoms protected, and how are any limitations handled? Are they absolute?
Core freedoms include preaching, evangelism, no state licensing of clergy or reviewing doctrine. No citizen made to confess or celebrate what they judge sinful think Acts 4, obeying God, nor coerced into silence on conscience objections where the state has no proper role. Limitations must be narrow, necessary, reviewable. Time, place, manner, rules for assembly tied to genuine safety needs, not viewpoint. Incitement, true threats punished. Defamation defined precisely. National security restrictions face prompt, reasoned judicial scrutiny with security-cleared counsel, balancing necessary limits with robust freedom.
What specific prohibitions are there on state coercion, especially regarding speech or association?
Compelled speech is barred. Compelled association, too. The state can require factual disclosures to prevent fraud, yes. But, as the sources put it, it may not draft citizens to utter creeds of the age. Exodus 20, Matthew 5, protecting intellectual and expressive freedom.
How is press freedom specifically protected, and what about other forms of expression like academic or artistic work?
Press freedom gets a strong presumption. Access to public meetings. Protection for sources within lawful bounds. That online ad library showing payers. Fast-track courts for prior restraint challenges. Academic and artistic expression have room to inquire, critique. Parents retain primary responsibility for educating children, Deuteronomy 6. Schools conform students in convictions but must observe neighbor love and not deny other civil rights.
How is equal treatment ensured, particularly regarding different beliefs? And what about conscience protections when rules conflict with sincere conviction?
Equal treatment forbids ethnic or confessional penalties. Guards the sojourner, Deuteronomy 10. Hate crime statutes address violent or property harms, not mere opinions. Conscience protections need to be real but bounded by justice. Believers and unbelievers alike can seek exemptions from rules burdening sincere conviction, provided third parties still get timely, equivalent service, Micah 6. The burden is on the state to prove necessity and lack of less restrictive means. In employment licensing, character standards focus on honesty, competence, not creed. But religious institutions keep freedom and internal governance in teaching Westminster 31.4.
What about data privacy in our digital age? How is that handled?
Data dignity is framed as part of neighbor love. Surveillance needs warrants if feasible, strict ex post review if urgent. Retention, sharing limited by purpose, dilution mandates. Citizens can see, correct, port their own records. Algorithmic decisions with civil consequences must be explainable, appealable.
How are these rights made credible? How do people actually enforce them?
Through remedies and oversight. A civil cause of action for unlawful censorship, viewpoint discrimination, retaliation. Courts award costs, tailored injunctions. Officials knowingly violating liberties face discipline. Oversight bodies, ombudsman, information commissioner, audit courts publish regular reports. Ministries post logs of permit decisions, protest authorizations, takedown requests. Transparency again.
Finally, what cultural support is envisioned for civil liberties? Laws aren't always enough.
Right. Sustained liberty needs culture. Civic curricula on ethics of speech, neighbor love online, the sin of false witness, Exodus 23, public rituals of repentance when authorities overstep, an annual liberties report naming abuses, remedies. The aim is a state that binds evildoers, shields the weak, refuses to bind conscience, so liberty becomes the anteroom of truth, and public peace, the stage on which the gospel may run and be glorified.
Okay, the blueprint also addresses church-state cooperation without entanglement. This sounds like a delicate balance. How does it define the distinct roles, and what's the vision for cooperation for the city's welfare without blurring those important lines?
Cooperation has to be principled, modest, and clearly bounded by jurisdiction. The church has the keys of the kingdom: word, sacrament, discipline, Matthew 16:18, Westminster 25:30. The magistrate has the sword for temporal justice, peace, Romans 13, Westminster 23. Neither can grasp the other's authority, Matthew 22, render unto Caesar.
So cooperation aims at
the city's welfare, like Jeremiah 29 says, praying for the peace of the city, but without entanglement. The state doesn't teach doctrine. The church doesn't wield civil penalties.
What's the specific mechanism proposed for coordinating this cooperation practically?
Establishing a small procedural office for faith and civil society partnerships. Its job isn't theology, it's coordination. Drafting model memoranda of understanding, vetting capacity, and safeguarding plans, integrating church-run ministries into things like disaster response, refugee care, addiction recovery, chaplaincy, counseling.
On what basis?
Always on viewpoint-neutral eligibility and performance metrics. Never theological tests. That's Westminster 20 again. Fairness.
How are funding and services handled to avoid coercion or entanglement? That seems like a key risk area.
MOUs would specify lawful aims, outcomes, data minimization, background checks, child protection standards, financial audits, and critically non-coercion clauses. Care is offered, not forced. Recipients can decline religious activities without losing aid. Providers keep freedom to speak according to conscience outside the funded task, Acts 5, 1 Peter 3.
What about funding mechanisms?
Grants, vouchers, fee-for-service contracts must be content-neutral about doctrine. Money follows lawful services, delivered meals, beds, counseling hours, not confession. Audits check receipts and outcomes, not sermons.
What about chaplaincy in state institutions like the military or hospitals?
Guaranteed access by right of conscience and pastoral care, 1 Timothy 2, James 1. Governed by policies forbidding proselytizing coercion, but protecting the chaplain's freedom to pray and counsel faithfully when invited. Alternative providers should be available so no one feels compelled.
How does the plan aim to prevent clerical influence on the state or political patronage of churches?
To avoid capture, churches should decline candidate endorsements from the pulpit, refrain from turning worship into campaign rallies, Westminster 31.4. Magistrates must not court church favor with subsidies tied to belief. Public honors for civic service offered to all credible providers, religious or not, on equal terms, Leviticus 24.
What legal safeguards are in place specifically regarding religion?
Several key ones. 1. No establishment, no state church, no doctrinal review boards, no church courts with civil power. 2. Strong free exercise right to gather, preach, evangelize, educate, order internal governance without state appointing clergy, Acts 4. 3. Targeted accommodations, case-by-case exemptions where sincere conscience conflicts, if third parties still get service, Micah 6. 4. Data dignity, pastoral communications protected, privacy by default.
Is there an emphasis on local cooperation between churches and state bodies?
Yes. Cooperation should be local by design. Diaconal ministries, partnering with municipalities for warming centers, food banks, legal aid, foster care, regional incident command systems, pre-registering congregations for logistics roles. Reimbursements flow through transparent e-portals. The sources note the Reformed conscience resists both state paternalism and watering down beliefs, so partnerships shouldn't require creedal compromise. Churches can collaborate on mercy across traditions while keeping distinct confessions, Galatians 6. The state welcomes plural providers.
And how do anti-corruption guardrails apply here when public money might go to faith-based groups?
They apply just the same. Public posting of MOUs, budgets, conflict of interest disclosures for officials and clergy, competitive mini-bids for larger service contracts, whistleblower protections, quarterly outcome dashboards. In schools, parents remain first teachers, Deuteronomy 6. Faith-based schools meet academic floors, civil rights, while freely teaching convictions. The state neither censors catechisms nor mandates its own ideology. Finally, both spheres encourage to practice public penitence. Agencies overreach, they repent. Churches fail in safeguarding or honesty, they confess, Proverbs 28. This ordered cooperation lets the magistrate secure peace and the church abound in mercy and truth, each respecting the other's distinct mission, Isaiah 33, 1 Timothy 2.
Now, beyond laws and institutions, the blueprint stresses civic virtue and formation. It calls this the slow work of teaching a people to love what is good and hate what is evil. How does this plan propose to cultivate the character and habits needed for a just society? This seems less tangible than building courts.
It is slow work, yes. It involves teaching people to speak truth, keep promises, Ephesians 4, Psalm 15, to labor diligently, steward gifts for neighbor love, Colossians 3, Galatians 5, to restrain appetites that make bribery seem normal, Exodus 23. While its root is the fear of the Lord, Proverbs 1 says, such virtue can be cultivated across society by common grace without the state controlling consciences, Westminster 2023 again. Ongoing formation braids three cords: home, church, civil institutions, each acting in its sphere.
What specific roles are envisioned for schools in this moral formation? How do you teach virtue without indoctrination?
The Ministry of Education would institute a civic curriculum that's content-rich and practice-heavy. Students learn rule of law by doing, mock trials on evidence, city council simulations on budgeting with real trade-offs, truth labs where pupils analyze claims, track sources, practice charitable debate, James 1 distinguishing persuasion from manipulation.
Connecting ethics to everyday life.
Exactly. Modules on honest weights and measures, Leviticus 19, Proverbs 11 connect economics to justice. Contracts, taxes, procurement, the cost of graft. Speech and conscience units teach ethics of testimony, the sin of slander, refusing false witness even for your own side, Exodus 20. Students practice retracting errors publicly, learning repentance is strength, not shame, Proverbs 28. Teachers need formation too, training on civic pedagogy, trauma-aware classrooms, viewpoint neutrality. Schools form citizens capable of reason and neighbor love, not partisan dogma.
And how do families contribute to this essential formation?
Families remain first catechists, Deuteronomy 6. Parents get simple guides for household liturgies of truth, keeping promises, making restitution, for stewardship, budgeting, generosity. For digital discipleship habits that slow speech, verify facts. The state can host parent workshops without prescribing creed. Churches freely preach the holiness of ordinary work. Proverbs 22, duties of rulers, and ruled Romans 13, and the grace that reforms.
What public rituals could reinforce these values across society?
Public rituals reinforce private habits. Justice Day, an annual civic checkup where courts, prosecutors, auditors publish dashboards, name failures, remedies. Municipal leaders award faithful steward commendations to civil servants, business owners, students showing honesty, service, Luke 16. Instituting meaningful oaths for specific jobs, judges, police, engineers with renewal ceremonies emphasizing reasons. Accountability, Westminster 22.
How does the plan involve service, and what role do markets play in teaching virtue, if any?
A voluntary service year pathway for youth, mid-career adults, tutoring, rebuilding, elder care, legal aid. Hours translate to education credits or tax benefits. Paired with mentors from churches, guilds, bar associations to tie skill to character, Titus 3. Markets also teach virtue. Fair contractor status certified for firms with clean audits, open books. Performance registers reward integrity. Encouraging apprenticeships. Ethics modules. Whistleblower briefings required for contracts. Prompt payment rules, transparent change orders, ensure workers aren't wronged, James 5.
What about ethics in digital spaces and peacemaking efforts? Those seem particularly relevant today.
Digital spaces need manners under law. Public agencies required to archive takedown requests, denials. Teaching citizens an online neighbor love rule, slow down, verify, don't share what you can't own before God. Matthew 12. Community norms, prizing civil disagreement. Peacemaking as a civic skill, Matthew 5, expanded mediation centers, restorative justice circles for appropriate offenses where offenders face those harmed, make restitution, Exodus 22, re-enter community with accountability, re-entry support for ex-prisoners tied to covenantal expectations like honesty, restitution plans.
And how does liberty of conscience apply throughout this formation process? How do you avoid it becoming coercive?
Liberty of conscience must be protected, so formation is persuasion, not coercion, Acts 5. Religious schools, ministries meet civil rights, academic standards while freely teaching convictions. Public institutions stay viewpoint neutral, open to scrutiny. The idea is, as these habits settle truth-telling, promise-keeping, disciplined speech, faithful work, service the Republic gains a moral musculature that statutes alone cannot supply. Under common grace, a people prepared by virtue becomes easier to govern, harder to corrupt, Proverbs 29, 1 Peter 2, 1 Timothy 2.
Finally, the roadmap details delivery governance, funding, and metrics. This sounds like the implementation engine. How does this ensure that all these ambitious plans actually convert conviction into cadence and promises into visible public outcomes?
Right. This is about stewardship, Luke 16 again, making sure promises become projects, projects become payments, payments become public outcomes. You can see, test, correct. It establishes a small but muscular cabinet delivery unit, CDU, by law or decree. Its job: set targets, unblock bottlenecks, publish results.
How does it operate?
On tight 30, 60, 90-day cycles. It owns a blockers list, convenes ministries weekly, reports a red, amber, green heat map, simple visual status to the Prime Minister and Parliament. It cuts through bureaucracy.
What are keystone KPIs, and how do they help track progress effectively across such a wide range of reforms?
The CDU curates maybe 12, 15 Keystone KPIs, key performance indicators that cut across the whole roadmap. Examples: median case duration, criminal and civil, percentage of judgments posted quickly, percentage of officials filing compliant asset declarations, procurement timeliness, red flag rates in tenders, completeness of the beneficial ownership registry, whistleblower cases handled, median pretrial detention days, civic curriculum coverage.
Anything tracking liberties.
Yes, crucially, it includes Liberty Sentinels like prior restraint orders overturned, protest permits processed on time, reflecting that duty to guard conscience Westminster 20, Acts 5. Each KPI has a baseline, quarterly targets, a named owner, public definition, clear data lineage, so number can't be fudged.
How is funding managed to ensure transparency and prevent capture, especially with potentially large sums involved in reconstruction?
Funding is designed to be unitary, transparent, milestone-linked. A single Treasury account, a Reconstruction Consolidated Fund, receive all revenues, grants, loans, recovered assets, centralized. Money leaves only through project bank accounts tied to verifiable milestones and e-procurement records.
What about budgeting?
A medium-term expenditure framework aligns 3-year ceilings to the roadmap. Ministries submit program budgets with outputs, outcome indicators, off-balance sheet deals, banned. Standardized chart of accounts so auditors, citizens can follow the money, Leviticus 19. All recipients above a threshold disclose beneficial owners, conflicts registered, payments auto-post to that integrity portal with contract IDs, vendors, deliverables, maximum transparency.
How is donor coordination handled? That can be chaotic.
Made mechanical, not just ceremonial meetings. A quarterly reconstruction board, co-chaired by Finance and the Supreme Audit Institution, aligns pledges to needs, harmonizes reporting, agrees on common anti-corruption conditions. Minutes, disbursement tables published.
What are the layered controls to ensure accountability throughout the system?
Controls are layered internally. Ministries have CFOs, internal audit units, risk registers. Externally, the Supreme Audit Institution does rolling performance and compliance audits. And Independent Evaluation Consortium universities, think tanks, performs impact studies. A citizens panel, drawn by lot reviews, dashboards, issues critiques. Cybersecurity, continuity planning treated as stewardship. An open data spine with APIs allows automatic dashboard updates, reducing manual reporting games. If secrecy is claimed, a special advocate and ombudsman review it.
How are performance and learning integrated? Is it just about reporting or does it lead to change?
Performance has consequences. Part of intergovernmental transfers, ministry budgets tied to verified KPI movement. Performance grants reward municipalities hitting targets. Funds withheld or clawed back for chronic non-compliance, Galatians 6. In procurement, faster payment for clean delivery, debarment, restitution for fraud. Senior officials sign annual performance compacts with measurable commitments. Oath renewals remind leaders promises invoke God Westminster 22. And learning beats blame quarterly after-action notes for missed targets, open clinics share fixes. Twice yearly, a State of Justice and Liberty report presented to Parliament inviting tough questions.
And how does citizen feedback fit into this delivery system?
Citizens need simple ways to feedback. A one-stop report and remedy portal accepts complaints, corruption, censorship, police abuse, service failure, gives tracking numbers, statutory response times, appeal paths, aggregated outcomes appear on the dashboard. And finally, repentance is embedded. When errors occur, say so, make it right, and publish the fix Proverbs 28. The whole system aims to make it harder to steal, easier to serve, simpler for the nation to see if rulers are faithful. So public trust becomes the scaffolding for reconstruction.
What an incredibly detailed look at Ukraine's potential future. From laying down those foundational moral principles to building these sophisticated delivery mechanisms, this deep dive certainly shows a comprehensive approach. It really prioritizes truth, accountability, and the dignity of every citizen.
Indeed. The ultimate vision here is what the sources call ordered liberty. It's about a public peace where the weak are protected, the powerful are bound by law, truth is prized, contracts mean what they say, worship is free, and citizens learn again to trust justice done out in the open. As the sources conclude, citing Proverbs 29, by justice a king builds up the land. It's the blueprint really grounded in that idea that righteousness and truth in public life are essential for a flourishing society.
This leaves us with a thought, perhaps. What part might we play in seeing these timeless principles rooted in Scripture and the Reformed tradition as outlined here, reflected in our own communities? Maybe in ways large or small, to foster greater trust and ordered liberty right around us. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time.